In ESO, tanks rely on the champion point system to raise mitigation versus certain attacks and to be just more lazy while tanking. I want to go over the warfare tree and figure out if all CP are built evenly or if they're just a jumbled mess where some are more OP than others and that some make zero sense. When we first open the CP tree, you are given the option to choose between Precision, Tireless Discipline, and Eldritch Insight. Each of these open up further portions of the CP tree. The best way to choose one of these is to start with what portion of the CP tree you want to unlock. Putting 10 points into any of these CPs unlocks two sides of the tree. Precision unlocks the DPS and healing side of the tree. Tireless Discipline unlocks the tanking and DPS sides of the tree, while Eldritch Insight unlocks the healing and tanking portions of the tree. Which one you choose is ultimately up to you, however there are better ways to focus the CP. As a tank, Precision is basically useless as Critical Chance doesn't really help you all that much and doesn't unlock the tanking portion of the tree to begin with. Between Tireless Discipline and Eldritch Insight, the choice is really up to you. The 520 Stamina or Magicka isn't too important and both unlock the tanking sides of the tree. Since we're going to be focusing the tank slottables, this choice doesn't 100% matter as once we get to a certain point we'll have all the passives anyway. For the rest of this video, I'll mainly be focusing on the tanking portion of the CP tree as if you're doing off rolls, you probably have a good understanding of what CP you want to use anyway. Along with this, the other sides of the CP tree don't really offer that great a slottable choice and some of the passives are just completely useless. If we want to get farther into the warfare tree, we have to go through the Staving Death subtree. Staving Death has 4 passives and 2 slottables within it. These 4 passives are Quick Recovery, Elemental Aegis, Hardy, and Preparation. Quick Recovery is required to have at least 10 points put into it, other than that it can be ignored at this point. The 2% healing received is nice, however the other passives and slottables are more important at this point. Now we have the choice between Elemental Aegis, Hardy, and Preparation. Elemental Aegis and Hardy should basically be ignored as 2% mitigation to magical and physical effects isn't that great compared to Preparation. Preparation is just a straight up 10% mitigation buff to all PvE damage. Preparation on basically any toon, even a DPS and healer, I'd recommend focusing getting Preparation as fast as possible as Preparation just increases your survivability by so much without having to do anything. Once we have the 20 points into Preparation, we can start looking at the slottables we'll need as a tank. The other passives we'll get once we have our 4 slottables chosen. Time for the part where everything becomes weird. This video is going to be focusing on PvE and wow, some of these slottables are bad. Starting off, we have the 4 basic mitigation CP. We have Ironclad, Enduring Resolve, Duelist Rebuff, and Unassailable. All of these CP add 6% mitigation to each damage type. For the most part, these 4 slottables will be good enough and we'll get through almost any content in the game only using these. We have one more slottable to talk about before we go farther into the tree. Inside the Staving Death tree, there is a slottable known as Resilience. In PvE, you should use this at all times. Not really. In PvE, enemies cannot crit, so this is basically useless for any PvE activity. Now that we have the basic stat boost CP out of the way, we can get to the more interesting CP. Riposte. Riposte does something. 33% on your next direct damage attack does basically nothing overall to your total damage output, and as a tank your damage is already so low unless you're purposely building for it that this 33% doesn't do anything. With the low damage and Riposte having a 5-second cooldown, there really isn't any use for this inside of PvE. You could maybe do a bit of damage to one random ad, but at that point your DPS just need to do more damage, so I don't know. Reinforce gives a shield while bracing. This is kind of counterintuitive towards how ESO is designed. Blocking an attack usually means it's some sort of heavy attack, and a shield isn't going to do much. Shields don't do a lot while blocking heavy damage. This is because shields don't inherit block mitigation, so blocking just to get a shield isn't really the best idea. In certain circumstances where you're taking a dot and you just want to block for half a second to get the shield, it's fine. However, most of the time if you're blocking with this, you're going to end up blocking a heavy attack. That heavy attack's going to rip straight through it and the shield's going to maybe reduce the damage by less than 1%. You also have to remember that Reinforce is a slottable. You are actively giving something up to get this CP. In PvE, it's never really worth it. So remember how I said there are no more stat increases? Well, I lied. Bulwark is just a resistance increase while you have a sword and shield or ice staff equipped. Bulwark is a great substitution when you don't need all 4 mitigation slottables. This can help change up your build and lead to more flexibility within your builds. Last Stand. Last Stand gives you one of the strongest buffs in the game, Major Heroism. This buff is extremely powerful and easy-ish to proc. Being at 20% health and having to take damage under this health threshold is a bit scary, however, most of the time it won't really matter, but if you take the wrong type of damage at the wrong time, this buff could technically kill you. Along with all of this, we have the introduction of Trample. Trample gives Major Heroism for just casting a skill. While Trample does have a cast time, it's infinitely easier to keep up and has some unique bonuses to go along with the Major Heroism anyway. Cutting defense is, well, a thing. In PvE, it can proc your enchants and poisons and does damage, I guess? The part of proccing enchants and poisons is nice, but the actual damage it outputs is laughable at best. Stacking this buff with CP and armor that makes this buff as strong as it can, I got a whopping 5k DPS while like 1,000 things were hitting me a second, it felt like. Overall, most of these slottables are just not better than Bulwark and the base mitigation CP. Optimizing for certain fights can be helpful, but most of the time you're just going to use Duelist, Rebuff, Ironclad, Unassailable, and Enduring Resolve. Even if you drop one of these because you don't need them, most likely you're just going to end up using Bulwark because you're going to be using an Ice Staff and Sword and Shield anyway, unless you're doing some random off-roll, and then at that point you're just going to be using DPS or Healing CP. I really quickly want to look at the other trees, because for the most part they give some good buffs, however most of the buffs aren't that useful to tanks. Battle Mastery and Flawless Ritual give a 60% increase to physical and magical status effect chance respectively. This can help keep uptimes on buffs given by said status effects. Overall, tanks do make use of status effects, and having a slightly better chance to proc them is helpful, as the status effect chance on anything but enchantments at the start of the game is incredibly low. Other than that, if you're doing an off-roll like DPSing, you can get some of the slottables, but more of that is just up to you and whether or not you can survive using some more DPS slottables. The last thing I want to go over is optimizing for content using Bosse as main tank. Bosse does around 50% of her damage with the dot Death Touch. This dot is unavoidable and will just happen throughout the fight, so mitigating dot damage and single target damage is a priority in this fight. We now have 2 open slottable slots, and looking at direct damage, she has a heavy attack and light attacks. We should be dodge rolling her heavy attack, as blocking it with death touch is just kinda stupid, as the death touch dot can just kill you through the heavy attack. However, even with this, with the light attacks, they do enough damage to be scary enough that direct damage might be something you want to look into. Now we want to look at what AoE effects Bosse applies. As main tank, we only have to worry about Embrace of Death. Embrace of Death is a one-shot no matter what you are doing. So mitigating this effect isn't really a priority, and we can drop it for something like Bulwark to get more resistances or some other thing that you might want to use. Overall, Bosse is a decent example of this, but every single boss in the game kind of works this way. There are a couple that do all 4 damage types, but for the most part you'll see 2 or 3 every single time with 1 or 2 missing. Well, I have no idea how many people make it this far into the videos, and I just wanted to say this is basically unscripted as all of my outros are, but I've remade this video 4 times. Every time I felt like something was really off, or it was going into too much depth or not enough depth, and it just ended up being really weird. I wanted to condense this as much as possible because the last version of this video was way too long, and I'm kind of happy with how it turned out. The infographics took up most of the time in this, but I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for everyone who said stuff about cutting defense, because I don't play PvP and it was just something I didn't know, but I still believe in PvE that is one of the worst CPs ever designed, but in PvP it sounds like it has some use cases, so who knows, maybe that's why it exists. But I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.